Hello, I'm Will. I'm very pleased to introduce you to Suren Verma. He is recently joined us as a investor in Capria. Suren, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Will. Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about some interesting topics, such as how do you build software that's used by 3 billion people a month?
It's crazy, isn't it? 3 billion.
Did you have any idea that you would get to that scale when you started this?
No, when I started at WhatsApp, it was less than 2. And it was growing, but 3 was like far out.
What does it take to build something at scale? And as you know, and you're now an investor in our firm, we don't invest in things that are at that kind of scale. We invest in things that are very small, but they have aspirations for scale.
Yeah.
Right? And what are some of the interesting learnings that you've had over the last 10 years as you've built an organization to build a product that can have that kind of scale and quality, and that might actually translate, though, down to smaller things as well?
At that scale, working at that scale means that you need to optimize for the tail. You can't just optimize for the head. The top 80-90% doesn't work. You gotta think about WhatsApp. It's used by literally everyone in India. You can go buy vegetables and talk to the person on WhatsApp, right? And you have a tiny little box, this much UI, very few pixels. And then you have to push a lot of features through it. You can't just sit tight on it and say, oh, I'm not going to change this thing because it might break something. So how are you going to not break the tail users while still adding value?
But explain more. But the head users, you're saying the people that are the most active users, power users. But you're saying you have to be thinking about the guy selling bananas on the corner at the same time.
Yes. And that becomes very hard.
And that makes it harder.
A lot harder.
Okay.
So whenever you change anything, you have to obsess over the details of it. So one difference between this and, say, working on, there are other apps that are also highly scaled. There's a difference in which how they think about how they operate. Like some other apps, they're maybe a lot more experimentation driven. So it's like, let's change lots of things. Lots of engineers can make lots of changes. Let data win. And WhatsApp, the approach is a lot more intentional. Yes, there's experimentation, but it's extremely intentional about what the change should be, and then really walking in the customer's shoes and people's shoes and being thoughtful about it. And that takes time. It takes time. And
that, which means that it takes discipline as a leadership team when you've got pressures on the competitive side, on the business side. But you're saying, hey, I got to worry about my tail users.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of them.
Yes. And that is the crux of what is the most challenging thing about doing that. Which means that since the pixel surface area is really small, and every change needs to go through a very small number of people who understand the big picture. Which means, how do you make decisions through an organization that's very large and trying to push a lot of change? Through a small number of people who have final say over it. How do you make decisions that are scaled? It's not that easy. But you got to do that. Because if everyone changes things independently of each other, the thing will fall.
Chaos, yeah.
Yes.
But it's talking about things that translate then, because as you were saying that, what came to my mind was one of the problems that many startups have, which is the bottleneck is the CEO or founder. And he or she are need for good reason to be there to approve or drive or whatever, right? And yet you're saying you're actually intentionally doing that,
yes,
in a highly scaled organization in order to ensure that you don't mess up the product.
Correct. It's a highly scaled startup.
So how do you do that though without having that small number of people not become a bottleneck that holds the organization back? You've got to balance,
yes,
right?
It's very hard to get that balance right, to be honest.
Okay.
There are a few things that work, but sometimes things just don't work, and that's okay too. But I think ultimately what you do is you optimize for what matters, which is the product's quality, the product's performance, reliability, privacy, etc. The things you care about, which is where culture comes in.
Yeah.
So you basically enumerate what matters to you, because you can't optimize for 10 things. You got to optimize for 2 or 3 things that really you care about. You make sure that you articulate that clearly. Leaders embody that. The culture sort of supports that. And then you optimize for those things. And if some other things fall by the wayside, that's maybe okay. So you do optimize just for a few things. That really helps as well.
So let's talk about the culture side of this a little bit. So you've worked at two very large companies, Microsoft and then Meta. And I think earlier you're mentioning that there's some similarities in culture, and I think of all engineering companies, there are some similarities that everybody understands if they're in that circle. But what are some things that were different when you came into the Meta culture? And I think you were doing scaled back-end work at Microsoft as well. So you were not a stranger to scale when you went there at all. But what were things that you had to either relearn about the Meta culture or that you wanted to change in the Meta culture to enable you to drive that quality and deliberate level of innovation in the small number of pixels used by 3 billion people a month?
The couple of differences that I noticed and I was not at WhatsApp when I went to Meta. I went to Facebook, which has a slightly different culture, and I was in infrastructure, which is again slightly different. One of the differences there, at least, is that it is much more bottom up than Microsoft is. So it's much more driven by engineers, and the role of managers becomes extremely hard in that sense, because the managers ultimately are accountable. They need to know what's happening. However, the real power to make changes really lies with the engineers. So engineers are empowered, and managers actually. At Facebook at least, managers don't typically say, I manage people. They say, I support people. So it's a much more of a supportive culture where the job as a manager is to really empower the engineers to do their best work. But you can't be a pure manager. If you're just a pure people manager, it's not going to work.
They won't respect it.
They won't respect it.
Yeah.
And you're ultimately accountable for the direction anyway. Yeah. So it's an extremely difficult balancing act to do bottom up and then yet have the respect and still be able to direct. So the thing that really works in that environment is what I would say is sharing context. It's extremely important for the managers and the leaders to translate. Their main job becomes that of translation. Like, they have the wider context. They know where things should go, and they better know it. That's their job. And then they need to transfer the context through the organization such that the engineers are hungry for context. Literally what they're looking for is, where can I make the most impact? And if you can connect them with that context and resources and let them loose, they'll do their best work. And it'll be a way better than a top-down thing, which Microsoft typically had, where it was like, you do this like a machine.
So try to translate that into a startup culture. How do you think, is it literally the same? Is it your job is to bring context and translate that down and to be supportive? Or I think, at least in the Indian context, they tend to be a bit more directive than supportive.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? And how, as you do some mentoring within our portfolio, what are things that you might want to bring to founders from your perch at Meta?
The one thing I would actually say is that it's extremely important for the translating context part is really important. There's another part that's really important for leaders. And this is something that's much more true in like the product teams in Meta, WhatsApp in particular, which is beyond just doing that, they also have to be directive.
Okay.
And that comes in the form of making product decisions and calls.
But let's get into this. So a few minutes ago, you said managers support versus direct, and now you just said the leaders have to direct. So it sounds like, again, there's some nuance here.
There's a nuance there. So that makes it doubly hard.
Help me understand that.
Yes, that makes it doubly hard. So the directiveness comes in the form of, as an example, could be like tie breaking, could be one thing.
Okay.
Having an oversight of how things are going, reviews, and ensuring that the bar is the right bar and the metrics are actually the right metrics, etc.
When you say tie breaking, though, you're saying you have two competing options, and you've got to make a decision which one.
Make a decision on which one.
Sure.
Signing off on product plans and ensuring that they are the right aspiration, for example. Looking at gaps across things. At the end of the day, A and B, you can see cracks and just like calling them out. etc., etc. So leaders actually play that role.
Okay. So the direction is coming in, setting high-level direction as opposed to being directive, saying engineer X or manager Y do Z.
Correct.
Right. So
Correct.
So that's
the distinction.
In the context in which you've been operating at Meta for the last 10 years, and then we both had a Microsoft in the past, there's many aspects of leadership and engineering and product support, supportive leadership that translate even into relatively small startups, and those are worth founders paying attention to, and learning from those who've made their mistakes and also had their successes. And one of those that's very much here and now is change management.
Yeah.
And I certainly faced this when I was leading a large group at Microsoft and trying to change the way we built Windows. It was really hard. Change management is sometimes the hardest thing to do. And if you look in the world of AI, that is tidal wave coming, is whatever metaphor you want to use, it's upon us. Change management is happening at a speed that nobody's ever experienced before. So now you have the benefit of not actually having to manage the engineers through this change management, but you certainly, for the last couple of years, you must have been facing a good bit of it. Yeah. So how did you approach the question around change management and getting your team to be embracing what was, at least at the moment, good and successful with AI coding, AI development methodologies, AI assisted development methodologies? So what are a couple things that you learned from that, or that worked or didn't work?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're absolutely right. AI is a tidal wave. It's coming at us. I actually like to think of it as like a bull. You can ride it, or it'll trample you, kind of thing.
Yeah, you can't ride it.
Can't ride.
So better metaphor.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So that does empower us. It's like we don't have to give up on this. Like we just have to lean into it and go with it. And I think that the biggest thing about change management, the thing that helps with change management, is like the idea of curiosity. I think that really helps. It's like, this thing is coming, I don't know what it's going to be, and it's a good place to be when you start there. Then you start digging into it. You're more open to it. There's been a lot of skepticism broadly, and I think I've noticed this within, in my working life as well. Like people initially looking at it and saying, "Oh, this won't be good enough," or "I use it and it's crap, it doesn't work," etc., etc. But yeah, just sticking with it and understanding what it is kind of working with it, and just incrementally, not really shooting. You actually don't know where you're going to end up. In this particular case, sometimes you know. So this is not a general answer to change management, right? This is about AI in particular. In general, sometimes in change management, you know where you're headed, and you can plot.
And you know where you want to get to, and then you say, what move on the chessboard will get me there?
Exactly, you can do that. Here, this is a little different. You actually don't know where you're going to end up. We could make some predictions.
But let's pick a hypothetical, right? Which, in fact, even Anthropic is talking about it this week, which is saying, look, they're saying 100% of our code could be developed by AI, right? And I've talked to people just recently as last week, a senior Google engineer at DeepMind, who said that around 30% of his code that actually gets checked in is developed by AI, and that all of their development is agent first within his team. And so, I mean, those are very real things.
Very real things.
Right. Those aren't like, oh, that might happen. No. Those are real companies saying they're actually doing these things today. Right?
It's already happening.
So as faced with that, and you're an engineering leader in a small team that is not embracing AI, to come back to the change management things, how do you light up your team to get them going?
If I really think about AI, AI can actually speed up many things, more than just coding. So you have to kind of think, first of all, you have to think about engineering as a multidisciplinary thing. You build designs, you code, you test, you support customers, you manage bugs, you know what I mean, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And AI helps with all of them. So first of all, that's the first thing. You gotta just try everything. The second thing is you got to be very intentional about where you use AI and what for. So there are some things that AI does really well at, where it can collapse software engineering, in extreme, and the software part zero cost or near zero cost. And I think I would say the leading edge of new product designs and stuff, I think that's a great place to be. Like, you starting from scratch, you could, instead of building Figmas and debating Figmas for weeks, you could write prototypes in minutes or hours or whatever and play with them.
You vibe code it and give it to a customer. Tell them
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So on the cutting edge, like the cutting edge of like the new products, new experiences, I would say AI full on. But as you get to, further towards like the legacy code bases and stuff like that, you're not going to rewrite them, at least not today. But I wouldn't, let's not speculate about future. But in today, AI can rewrite them, but you could make things 30 to 50% more efficient still. And because there are lots of micro things that happen during that, like this gardening that happens. Engineers spend so much time on fixing those P2 bugs and P1 bugs that are just like out there, or customer issues that take their time and they want to add features, but a high impact issue comes in. Well, we can use AI to automatically debug what the customer issue is. We can look at the logs, etc., bisect, figure out where the problem is, maybe even propose a fix, right? There are many of these things that engineers typically spend 30 to 50% of the time already. That can be taken away.
So what you're saying then is that one way to get people's head around the AI opportunity is to say, hey, it's going to give you more time to do the stuff you want to do.
Yes.
Right? By helping you check off those bugs that you were kind of not excited about, right? Or help check them off more quickly and let you go and focus on the innovation you really want. So that's a good tool.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that people do that are unpleasant or people don't want to do them, and then AI just takes them off your plate.
Yeah. And going back to culture again, are there any areas where you'd say, hey, in the way we built the culture, if I could do it over again, or if I was in charge from the beginning, because you didn't come in at the very beginning, I might do something a little bit differently?
Specifically about
building great products.
Yeah.
Right. Are there any things that you think that hey, it works this way, and I if it worked more that way, it would be better?
I think culture is what drives how an organization works. It's closely related to the values, and ultimately you figure out what culture you want based on the outcomes you want. And there's no one single culture that works. So what works for an operating system or the small pixel world of a large-scale messaging product is not the culture that would work for an early-stage startup that's still trying to figure out if my product is worth anything. In one case, in the latter case, what you want is a culture of experimentation. You want to move really fast, and you want to try different things. What really matters there is experimentation, product insight, skills of working with customers, really seeing the needs, etc., and iterating. What really works well in the mature case is like focus on quality, focus on being conservative in terms of the way you make changes. So I think you have to pick the right culture.
And then, but you're also saying that you have to recognize where you are in your product and business life cycle, and then evolve your culture. You have to morph your culture over
time, which is one of the even harder thing to do. Morphing culture is not easy. Because culture is very deep in people's psyche. At the end of the day, and changing that is not easy. Sometimes, so that's actually a big challenge. Sometimes you need all different cultures for different parts of your product. In a product like WhatsApp, what works really well for the consumer-facing pixel, the message send bubble, like that thing that's highly contended for, is different from what you might want for the surface that is where you can place ads on the business app. Where you can iterate a lot faster.
You have to, because you don't really know how to do that yet. Exactly. I've ignored that UI for a long time.
Exactly. So you could afford to iterate faster on it. You need to.
Right.
So at that point, you're the same organization and you're operating differently in different parts.
Part of what we're talking about here, though, is being aware.
Yes.
Right. And I think for intentionality, right? And I think for founders, being aware of where you are today, where you need to be next year and the year after, will help you ensure that you are tuning your culture to meet your business's needs today, and that you can get it to where you need it to be and not too long from now. Saran, you've hired a lot of engineers over the years, and you probably, like all of us, have had your set of stars that you feel really good about, and your set of people that weren't really the right person for the job. In the world of AI, engineering managers and founders are hiring people knowing that this thing we just talked about a minute ago of how much code is written by the AI, how much AI infiltrates all parts of the product development process, those things are changing so fast. So what are things that you would be looking to make sure that you got right as you hired your next star engineer in a world that's changing this fast?
I feel like in the new world where AI does a lot of the coding and takes away a lot of the sweat part of the job, our jobs are going to be, I wouldn't say reduced, but maybe that's the right word.
They're going to be changed.
They're going to be changed to get to the essence of what matters, closest to the value in the value chain. What is closest to the value in the value chain, which is the customer, the unmet need, and the product definition that's going to meet that need. And getting to that as quickly as possible with iteration. So I think what really would help a lot would be to have people who aren't specialists in one particular thing, that don't need like the most amazing coder anymore. What we need are people who can think laterally across a bunch of disciplines and be a super engineer, quote unquote, or a super product person, so to speak. It could be either, it doesn't really matter. Who can really connect these things.
There's a term that some people use for that. They call it range, right? Which is or latitude, right? So what is the, and as you said, and we've all managed people that are deep experts in a certain area,
yeah,
but get them out of that area and not so great,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And what you're saying is, hey, anybody you bring in, you need to make sure they have a wide range in which they can operate. Right? Because any one area of depth could be completely taken up by AI tomorrow.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think those people, and I would actually say that when I look back at the people who have done the best, there are two types of people, you're right. There are the super depth people who have done really well as well. But people who do really well in terms of like the broader impact are the ones who have the range, in general, even today in the current world. And they are the ones who are most likely to do well.
And one other thing that, and I've told you about this book I'm working on, and we think a lot about particularly people early in the career, and you say how is your career going to be different than my career in terms of what your entry level role might be, what your next role might be.
Yes.
And one thing that I'm starting to see more and more of is that there's almost no such thing as an entry-level role for a human. There are entry-level roles for AIs.
Yes.
Right? But the human actually has to become a manager really quickly.
A manager of AIs, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Or I mean, literally, you had the same things you had to once you got promoted to being a manager, which might have been 3 or 5 year journey, right? If you were an entry-level engineer until you were actually a project lead, then a manager. You have to actually start to be doing those same kinds of things in your job day one. Right, you got to learn how to understand requirements. You have to learn how to break problems down.
You're absolutely right.
Right, you have to be able to look for accountability among all the different, in this case, AIs who are agents who are delivering for you. Right,
you're absolutely right. So I think what you're referring to is absolutely perfect. So there's like two aspects to a person, and as they grow through levels or whatever in their career, progress to their career, there is this aspect of dealing with ambiguity, complexity, scope, and that stuff is the one that truly helps people grow through their careers. And the other part that is more visible, which is how big your org is, et cetera, is kind of interesting. But this other thing still exists.
Right. And that other thing's going to be in your face much earlier in your career, right? If not day one, soon after that, right?
Right.
And the organizations, when you're, again, hiring entry-level people, you want them to come in exhibiting some skills in those areas, right? You're not going to teach them how to be a manager. You want them to show that, hey, they've actually learned how to break down hard problems. They've dealt with ambiguity, right? And from in the beginning.
Super hard. So it's a great question for me at this point as to how do you get entry-level people who can do that? And I do wonder if it is at the end of the day sorting like if you think about people, there are some people who do have the capability. Maybe it's a smaller subset of people, and they are the ones who are more likely to be successful.
Yeah.
In this, so.
I think particularly in a startup environment, you're always hiring for people that can play multiple roles, right? That is one of the things that's key.
Absolutely.
And those, they call you the CEO and chief bottle washer, right? Because that's, you as a founder, that's what you do. But that goes all the way down to some level. And now as the AI will be doing more of these just general turning the crank, coding, research, whatever it is, then the people the humans you bring in have to have that kind of range almost from day zero.
Yeah. I think there's one word that kind of encapsulates, like there's one quality I feel like, which is ownership and accountability. But there are people, I noticed this difference between people. There are people who just feel like they own, like right from day one. They feel like they're the owners. They're the founders.
Yeah.
They're like day one, right out of college. And there are some people who are just waiting for instruction.
Right.
There's a difference.
That's a very easy thing to look for. And so you're basically saying, hey, let's find people who exhibit traits of ownership and accountability at a young age.
Correct.
And early in their career, and those are the people that are going to really likely succeed.
I think so. I think they'll find their way. If they have curiosity, adaptability, all those other things, they'll find their way.
So, man, it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing how some of your mentoring relationships build with our founders. I know that they value it highly, and so thanks again for being with us.
Of course. Thanks for inviting me.